If you've been following the news, you've probably noticed just how differently America and the European Union respond to crises in places like Ukraine and Gaza. Why is there such a split? Is it all about politics, religion, or just cold hard cash? Let's start with Ukraine. The US has been front and center, sending weapons, aid, and taking a hardline stance against Russia. For America, this is about maintaining its influence and containing Russian power. But for many European countries, it's personal. Ukraine's right next door, and the conflict threatens their security and energy supplies. Even then, not every EU country is on board. Some are more cautious, worried about escalating the conflict or damaging their own economies. So it's a mix of political strategy and economic self-preservation. Now Gaza. Here, the split gets even more obvious. The US has long been a strong supporter of Israel, shaped by decades of political alliances and, yes, domestic political considerations. In Europe, opinions are far more divided. There's deep sympathy for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and public pressure in places like France, Spain, and Ireland pushes leaders to call for ceasefires or criticize Israeli actions. But again, it's complicated. Historic ties, immigrant communities, and regional politics all play a role. So is it political, religious, or economic? Honestly, it's a tangled web of all three. Political alliances, economic interests like trade and energy, and sometimes religious and cultural connections all shape these responses. In the end, these aren't just government decisions. They're shaped by public opinion, history, and the realities of global power. And as the world gets more connected, those lines just keep getting blurrier. But there's another factor that's rarely talked about openly: race. Could racism, or at least unconscious bias, be influencing how the US and EU react to the crises in Ukraine and Gaza? Let's look at the coverage. When war broke out in Ukraine, headlines were everywhere. Western leaders and media described Ukrainian refugees as just like us: European, educated, middle class. There was shock that such violence could happen in a place that looks so familiar. In contrast, when violence erupts in Gaza or elsewhere in the Middle East, the tone often shifts. Coverage can be less sympathetic, and the underlying message sometimes suggests that conflict in these regions is somehow expected, or even inevitable. Public opinion reflects this too. Polls show that Western populations are often more willing to accept Ukrainian refugees than those fleeing violence in Gaza or other non-European countries. Some of this may be due to geography or security concerns, but it's hard to ignore the role that ethnicity and religion play in shaping perceptions. And it doesn't stop at public opinion. Government actions often mirror these biases. Billions in aid and open borders for Ukraine, but more restrictions and cautious statements when it comes to Gaza. Leaders are careful about how they frame each crisis, sometimes emphasizing shared values or history, other times focusing on security or foreignness. So, is it all about racism? Not entirely. But it's a thread woven through the fabric of these responses, often invisible but undeniably there. And as long as it stays in the background, it's hard to have an honest conversation about what really shapes our reactions to global crises.